Hey everyone, we are super excited to be spreading awareness and destigmatizing mental health in the Black and Brown communities.
This podcast is a safe place for us to discuss our adversities and even our shortcomings. We all have a story.
Just remember, no matter what we go through, our story goes on. Hi everyone, welcome to episode 8 of Our Story Goes On. I hope everyone is having a great week and day. We have Adonis with us again today.
I'm back.
And we're going to be talking about post-traumatic stress today, specifically post-traumatic stress disorder and all of its components and just everything about it. And I chose this topic for today because I wanted to shed light on trauma as a whole and how post-traumatic stress disorder, like the actual diagnosis, is often misconstrued. It's often misinterpreted for a number of different reasons, which I'm sure we'll get into today. But that's kind of the premise of today. So let's get into it. Are we good?
Yes, but always, when I'm here, we got to ask the powerful question. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling good. I'm liking today's energy. And I always feel that every time I link up with Adonis, that's how I feel. I always feel like, you know, you meet people or you talk with them and you feel drained. It's the complete opposite of Adonis.
You will always be charged.
Right, exactly. I'm like charged when I have a conversation. And then just our producer, Jay, we were just talking and everything. So it's feeling good energy today. I'm good. But how are you today?
I feel very enlightened, like very blessed. So just chill, relax. Like nothing can mess up the vibe right now.
Exactly. So we got to take the good and stick with the good, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely. Great.
So, PTSD.
Yeah. So PTSD stands for post-traumatic stress disorder, and it's basically a diagnosis or condition after a person experiences something frightening, shocking, or dangerous. And usually our body goes into fight or flight mode, right? So it's our body's reaction basically of something that might have happened to us that's traumatic. So a lot of times though, people feel that only military base or dangerous job roles can equal PTSD, when that's not the case at all. Anyone could develop PTSD from a traumatic event. So I really wanted to start with that first, because what I might find traumatic, Adonis may not. Or what he may find traumatic, I may not at all either. We all experience trauma differently. And it's also important to note that when a person does experience something shocking, dangerous, or frightening, that doesn't also mean that they're automatically going to have PTSD either. So it's just one of those words that are just thrown around, like OCD, ADHD, all that kind of I have such PTSD from that. It's like, do you though? So
something that's very common when it comes to PTSD. So I realize people will say, "Oh, why don't you just avoid those situations?" But here's the thing, right? When it comes to PTSD, a lot of times when it comes to triggers, it's very hard to avoid something if you're very unaware that it's a trauma or a trigger.
Exactly. Right. Because it's sudden sometimes, right? We're not expecting that trigger or that thing to come up at all at times. But what are some things you've heard about PTSD? Or
I know for myself, before I guess I became hip to the term, it was always associated with the military, like military men and everything, like PTSD, don't like the fireworks,
right.
So that was like my first exposure to it until things happened with my father and everything. Like we touched off screen and everything,
right.
But most recently, I'll say my ACL tears. So I got tattoos on my legs, and I was trying to figure out why everywhere else I can take a tattoo, but when it came to my legs, it just I couldn't. It hurts really, really bad. And so I'm already reflecting, as I always do through my meditations. And I realized it's that because I had severe trauma on my legs through surgery.
Yeah.
So, but I was always under anesthesia, so I never felt
Right.
felt the pain or anything.
Of course. Hopefully not.
So it made it like, yeah, that would be crazy.
Right.
But so it makes a lot of sense. It made a lot of sense whenever, because even now my legs are very sensitive. Mm-hmm. So it could be the littlest thing, and I'm like,
Oh, that's interesting. So like the physical trauma.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's different tiers of PTSD. I think people don't really touch upon that, and just not a disclaimer, but something to kind of bring to the front of our brains is that we can forget about it, but our body holds on to trauma.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It
stores in our body.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Or it can be stored in our body, I should say.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so the thing too is that let's say you do experience a traumatic event, symptoms tend to show up pretty early, or symptoms/signs of it, and up to like about 3 months after the incident. However, it also can show up years afterward. So there's really no, of course, like everything else when it comes to diagnosing conditions, there's criteria to it, right? So like me as a therapist, when I evaluate and diagnose a client with post-traumatic stress disorder, there are certain things that a person needs to quote unquote qualify to be diagnosed with it. And that's why it's such a complex diagnosis, because when I ask a client, that's one of the questions I asked during the intake process. Have you ever experienced any trauma before? And most people are like, I don't know. Have I? Yeah. Right? I don't, or no. It's either like, no, yes. And then if they express, okay, yes, I've been through X, Y, and Z. But I also think it's like you had mentioned that you were first exposed to it about the military. And of course, we're not saying that military people don't experience PTSD, because they certainly do.
It's not what we're saying at all.
Right. However, it's just, it goes way, way more than just that, right? Like sexual assault, physical and emotional abuse as a child, a car accident, and then Adonis was just talking about his physical experience of getting surgery was traumatic for him. And you didn't realize it probably. Would you say that the tattoos was your first indication that you might have experienced?
I think when I first started playing basketball again,
okay,
and realized how whenever I will go up for like a certain layup, like a contested layup, I will throw the ball on purpose, even if I could make the layup.
Okay.
But if someone was like right next to me because of my trauma of like coming down and bending my knee or something, I got rid of the ball every time.
Okay, right.
So I just started like having faith. Pretty much.
So you would like try to prevent that, so that, because then you were kind of scared about something happening possibly to your leg.
Exactly, and that's the thing about PTSD. Like some of it could be like noticeable, and like you could be aware of it and try to prevent it. But we all know what happens when you avoid things.
Right. Exactly.
It just resurfaces and becomes 10 times worse in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing too, like again, going back to the diagnostic criteria of it, these symptoms/signs have to be present for more than a month. So that's what's really important, because like I said, like, a person can go through a traumatic event and feel okay after a month, right? Whether they process it or whether they've felt like, hey, I'm actually okay. I'm, and they're actually okay. It's not like they're avoiding it. They're like, I feel fine from it. I expected maybe to feel a little bit more traumatic or trauma from it, but I'm okay. So they have to persist for at least a month to be able to be considered also as post-traumatic stress disorder too. So that's another key thing to look out for as well. But you had mentioned the word avoidance, where you had said people say just avoid it, right? And that's actually a sign or symptom of post-traumatic stress disorder too, where it's like people are purposely avoiding people, places, things, because it takes them back to their traumatic experience too. So, yeah.
I would say one of the most prevalent ones that I've observed is people who avoid relationships because of a possible traumatic experience that they had with relationships. For example, someone can meet a really great individual, right, after a very traumatic domestic violence situation. But because of that trauma that they face in that relationship, they are preventing themselves from fully committing. Yep. Because of the possibility of it happening again. And for myself, I had an issue with that because when my dad got deported, my fear going into relationships, or whenever I felt very close to someone or I was getting close to someone, I was afraid to commit because I'm like, they're going to leave.
Yep. The fear of abandonment.
Exactly. And I think I could never pinpoint it until recently, until I like really started to like pick up on my patterns and stuff like that. It's so crazy. It's so crazy.
It is, because again, going like what I mentioned before, years afterward, right? Like you don't realize maybe until you start reflecting on yourself or healing in your own way, that you're like, hey, maybe I'm this way because of that. You know what I mean? And so, but yeah, all that is very important to know about the signs and symptoms of it. But oh my God, there is so
much.
There's like so many symptoms to look out for in post-traumatic stress. It's one of the, like, if you look at the criteria of PTSD, it's long, like as opposed to generalized anxiety disorder or major depressive disorder. Those are a little bit shorter, but because PTSD is so complex that it actually falls into categories about what, and then it's also about when there's a diagnosis for 6 years and up, and then there's other things to look out for if you're 6 years and younger. So that is a whole different ball game too.
Yeah.
Yeah, because children go through it too.
So as a man growing up in America, a black man growing up in America, one of the things I've realized when it comes for us as men, what we tend to do when we don't want to talk about anything that's been very traumatic to us, we get into this hyper work mode. I notice it for myself and those around me whenever we've experienced anything. Because you also got to think about it. In our society, talking about your feelings is deemed as being a woman.
Right.
It's crazy. It's crazy to me.
Yeah.
So whenever you don't have a space as a man to talk about what you go through on a day-to-day basis, internally, whatever the case may be, it's very stressful. It's very stressful because it starts to build up. It starts to build up. So you're trying to find a way, how, if I can't release it, how can I distract myself from seeing or acknowledging that it's truly here? So you get into this hyper work mode, right? So you see it all the time when a guy gets out of a relationship, he goes straight to the gym.
Yeah, that's true.
He gets super buff, whatever.
Right,
but the
right.
thing is, you have to take a holistic approach to healing yourself. So if it's okay I'm not saying don't go to the gym after a breakup. It's not what I'm saying. Stay fit.
Right.
But also realize that to an extent you're avoiding the true work, which is internal. You focus so much on the external because you're trying to prevent the pain from coming back or reoccurring. Yeah. So how can I make myself look more valuable? But realistically, the second I get to know someone, I'm still the same broken individual.
Right.
See, that's what's so important, to take that holistic approach, because the same way you're working yourself without, you have to take the same approach and work ethic within.
Yeah, that's very true. And where do you think that comes from in terms of work mode? Like something happens, like a breakup, and then boom, I need to go ahead, and then is that avoidance in a general sense? Yeah, I would say it is. From personal experience, you're trying to seem more valuable. I like that. Yeah.
So because in our society, it's if you don't have a six pack, if you don't have six figures, blah 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 blah, right? But then we focus so much on like the hyper masculine, right? Which I'm not saying being masculine is a bad thing, right? But it has to be a balance. So if you're only focusing on the glitter, right, the exterior, it looks shiny, it looks like gold. But then when you finally approach it, you realize it's a steaming pile of poop that the glitter sprinkled all over it. Right? So you look good, but realistically,
you're a piece
not.
of shit.
Yeah.
No pun intended.
Literally, though. So you have to work on yourself.
Right.
You have to work on yourself because, it all comes back to trauma.
Right.
PTSD is such a huge umbrella, and so many things are under that, right? But you have to realize what your triggers and traumas are. Yep, absolutely. And the only way you're gonna really be aware of that is by putting yourself through situations. So adversity, right? Yeah. And this is something that I got during my trip in Dominican Republic. I was sitting on the beach, so just kind of set the stage for you guys.
This visualization.
Close your eyes.
Right.
But I was sitting on the beach in Nagua. It's like a city, northern part of the island, like kind of close to Samaná and like Puerto Plata and all that stuff. And I was sitting there. It's like my last day up there. I was only spending the weekend. I had my journal with me, had my phone, and put my phone to the side because I was just like, I wanted to be extremely present. I was present for like an hour and a half. And I'm looking at the waves, and when you're non-overly stimulated, you get to pick up on things that are so subtle that we get quickly bypassed because we're overly stimulated. That's the reason why I'm hanging out with someone. I like to put my phone to the side because I want to be fully present. So I was sitting there watching the waves go back and forth. And every time the waves will always start off very soft and weak. But then after like every fifth or sixth, it was just one big one.
Right.
And I would get wet. But what I realized is that with every crash, you have to learn something. Right? That's the reason why the waves kept coming back stronger.
Yeah.
Also, it's probably some scientific explanation to that.
Probably something with the tide.
Right. The coordinates, the wind,
Right.
and everything. But something I realized is that whenever the waves came back, right, every time a new wave came, it would drag back sand, debris, or anything, and it will come again, and again, and again. So what I got from it is that with every adversity that happens in your life, you have to learn the lesson and take it back with you, so that way when adversity comes again, you're more prepared and you're stronger. Absolutely. There's going to be ups and downs in your life. It's a roller coaster. But it's just a matter of changing your reactions to responses. Because if you're able to respond to things you used to react to, it shows that you've mastered your emotions. You mastered yourself, most importantly.
Which takes a lot of practice and time, right? I think that's like one of the most common things I hear from my clients that see me. I want to be able to react better, right? Or I want to be able to reduce my anger. And that all comes down to how to regulate your emotions. So if you're upset by someone or you're triggered by something, we tend to react in, not always, of course, but as humans, especially if we're triggered by something traumatic, we tend to react negatively, right? I mean, we don't tend to react in a happy way when we're triggered by something, right? Like never, but it's not so much about reacting in a happy way. It's more about, I'm not allowing this to then take over my entire day now because I was triggered by something, right? So that's really what it comes down to. Were you gonna say something?
Yeah, I was gonna say it's very crucial to be able to. So here's the part when you know you've mastered your emotions, when your reactions turn into responses. And what I mean by that is you're always going to be triggered, right? That's the whole point of life. There's always going to be some type of adversity to put you through some type of test so you can learn something, right? But if it's something that seems super familiar and you're constantly going through it, maybe 10 years in a row where every couple months you're going through the same situation, chances are you still have to learn that lesson, and you can't move forward until you fully grasp what this lesson is trying to teach you. So that being said, you're always going to be triggered, right? Some triggers you might be aware of, so that you go into this avoidant type of like mindset where you're just like, I only want these type of people around me because these people trigger me and blah blah blah. Yeah. Or understanding that life has a funny way of just putting these triggering people or things into your life, right? And just learning to say, I'm triggered, I'm going to allow myself to process these emotions, and I'm going to carry on my day. Yeah. Because here's the thing, right? Life is not sunshine and rainbows. I'm pretty sure that's from Rocky, right? It's gonna beat your ass. It's gonna beat your ass. You're gonna have so much adversity, but right, it's again like the waves. What are you gonna take from every lesson to come back stronger? So that way, when you do experience adversity again, how are you gonna handle it? Are you gonna react to it, or are you gonna respond to it?
I like that, but the difference between reaction and responding, right? Because what you're saying is that when you react, there tends to be an emotion to it.
It's like more impulse.
Okay, got it. Right.
Reaction. Impulse reaction versus responding is a more controlled reaction.
Right. Got it. You're more controlled, you're more regulated, and then you can probably determine how you're going to respond based on your environment, maybe who's around, how you're feeling, and things like that. Yeah, for sure. And that's the thing too with triggers. I wanted to go back to the word triggers too, because with post-traumatic stress, the triggers are they can either be super obvious to you or they could be sudden, right? I mean, you could be walking down the street feeling great, and then you see something or someone that might have reminded you of that one time, and boom, you're back to maybe your heart rate beating fast. You're back to your mind going to that one time that happened. So they're sudden. Or, like I said, sometimes they're not sudden at all. But again, it's about understanding your triggers. And that's really the first step. And I think being able to get through post-traumatic stress disorder, or at least the first few steps to it, and in the sense of I understand my triggers, so now how can I work through them?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And again, I think that's what it is. Many people just avoid, and that's not going to really get you anywhere. You know, and I'm certainly not encouraging you to dive into your triggers where you're unsafe, right? Like, but okay, like you get into a car accident and you're avoiding that street that you got into a car accident. You know what I mean? I understand that 100%, but there also could be healing in going back to that street, right? And then experiencing, hey, I'm okay. I went through this street. I went through that, and I'm okay right now. I'm safe. I'm safe right now.
Yeah.
You know?
It's like the same thing, the same approach that we give the kids whenever they scrape their knees, right? Mm-hmm. We'll coddle them and we'll say, it's okay, you know? Because the thing is about kids is they're very impressionable. Mm-hmm. So if they scrape their knee, yeah, the pain hurts. But if you're freaking out, it's going to make the experience 10 times worse.
Absolutely.
So it's kind of like, and I'm sure your listeners have heard this term a lot, inner child healing.
Yep.
The same way you will coddle a child that's in front of you, the same way you have to coddle yourself. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to PTSD, a lot of us deal with post-traumatic stress from our childhood. Mm-hmm. So whether it be neglect, abuse, whatever the case may be, is you being able to identify those things and just work through them. Mm-hmm. You know, one thing that quarantine, which seems like forever ago,
I know,
it allowed me to dive so deep into my psyche, and I wrote out what triggered me. It was like a list of like 15 things.
Yeah.
And it was exes, it was my dad, it was just like my sister, like little things. But the thing about us is we love ignorance. And it's that we are aware of these things, right? But when we make the choice to not work on these things, we're choosing to be ignorant.
Yep.
So when you're choosing to be ignorant, it's like, and then you're constantly trying to figure out why your life is in shambles. You only have you to blame,
right?
Because ultimately, you are the author of your life. Your life is a story.
Yep.
So what are you gonna do? Well, how do you want to create your life? That's the reason why you have people who become ultra successful, and then people who have no success.
Yeah.
We all have access to the same information. It's just a matter of how intentional are you or seeking out that information. And on top of that, once you know the information, are you gonna execute on it?
Yeah.
So it's not that I feel like I'm better than most people, because we all go through trauma, right?
Absolutely.
It's that I made a promise to myself that when I have kids, I don't want to pass on trauma.
Yeah, absolutely. Breaking generational cycles.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. And I think too, it's that, again, going back to the trigger, I guess, aspect of it too. Again, I'm trying to like word this in a way that makes sense. It's like, I don't think the triggers are necessarily going to go away in a sense. It's just about how you're now going to be able to manage them when you have a trigger, right? I mean, would you agree? Like,
definitely.
It's like, you know, and it's also when you are in a situation that you might be with someone that might have caused your trauma too, right? And you both have healed from it though.
Yeah.
But that you still might be triggered, right? Because you're around them, or whether you went through something together as a whole, or you guys went through something separate and came back together.
I feel like it's more of how you navigate through it, right? I feel that,
Yeah, for sure.
like you said, your triggers are never gonna go away, right? If, for example, it's a very extreme example, the Holocaust. We acknowledge that was a thing, right?
Right.
Everyone knows that was a thing. We can't take away, just because hundreds of years have passed by, that wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
Right? It's always going to be a thing. It's just a matter of how are you going to be able to view it from a different lens. Because it's only so much victimizing that we can do.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that not to downplay the Holocaust, because it was a very, very,
very real,
and very horrible thing that happened to humanity at the time. But how do you change your response to it?
Right.
Are you going to continuously hold anger for a person who's not alive anymore? Or are you going to acknowledge it for what it was? Like, it was a very horrible thing, and I hope that humanity learned from it.
You hope that you learn from it.
Yeah,
right.
So the same thing with our triggers. It's like, you had an ex that might have cheated on you or, abused the hell out of you. But that's never going to go away.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of how am I not going to take that baggage into my next potential relationship?
Absolutely.
Because the thing is, you could literally destroy your own life if you continuously keep trying to bring the same chapter to the present chapter.
Yeah. So true.
You're going to have a run-on chapter if you don't close it out.
The chapter will just keep going.
Absolutely.
Right. And I wanted to touch really quick to something called CPTSD. I don't know. Have you ever heard?
I've heard of that.
Have you ever heard that?
I've heard of that.
So
in the book Whole Again, it touched on it, but I forgot exactly the term.
So it stands for complex PTSD, and what it really means is, so there's no such thing technically as the diagnosis of CPTSD. It's actually just starting to become more discussed within the last few years. It's just, if you want to be diagnosed, or not want to, if you have a diagnosis of PTSD, it's just PTSD. But in recent, I guess, like research, or again, like we were talking about before off screen, right? Like, things are always changing. Like, when I was in graduate school, there was no such thing as learning about CPTSD. So I came across this on my own research or on my own people that I follow on social media. Like, I follow a lot of therapists and all that. So, but what it means is that when a person has experienced ongoing trauma. So, for example, someone who is in a domestic violence or abusive relationship, ongoing, right? If you are in a partnership that maybe the person is constantly cheating on you and you know it, that's traumatic, right? It's going to do something to your inner self that would be considered CPTSD. Someone who's constantly at battle, for example, maybe they are at war and they extend an amount of time, right? Years, that would be CPTSD. It just basically means it's ongoing, as opposed to maybe someone who, again, might have been through one car accident and experienced it. You know what I mean? Like, that's obviously still post-traumatic stress, but it's not ongoing. You're not constantly getting into bad car accidents every time you leave your house. So, but I wanted to touch on that too, because it's so important, because that's another thing I think is really misconstrued about PTSD, is that I think that people think, get over it. This happened 5 years ago, when you could be going through it every single day of your life. And that's where it just becomes, again, more complex. It's not just a simple, this happened and then there's that.
Yeah, and there will always be constant reminders. Like, it could be a smell, a sight. It could be anything that could trigger you.
Right.
I remember before I really started to embark on my healing journey, like with my dad and everything, and I was struggling to, I just got a relationship, jumped into another one, which I don't recommend anyone doing. It's not
which
healthy.
I'm totally guilty of.
It's not healthy.
No, I wouldn't recommend it either. Even though I did it, I would never recommend it.
Happened to work out.
Right.
But what I would say is this, is that if you are a person who just got a relationship, take the time for yourself. Take the time to reflect on everything. Reflect on everything you just went through in that relationship, whether it be good, bad, ugly, indifferent, whatever the case may be. So that way, moving forward, you know what you don't want and what you do want.
Yep.
And give yourself enough time to truly process it. So my issue was, I was still holding on to my dad's perceived absence, where realistically, it's just certain things he couldn't control that just happened. So just because that wasn't that true reality, it was my reality, and it was very much real. And it was very much valid. So whenever I feel like just now kind of listen to the term CPTSD, I might fall into that category a little bit.
Right.
Where I constantly just put myself in situations where it would trigger a similar sensation, but it wasn't the same situation. And I think a lot of times what we tend to do is that whenever we get triggered, it's an old emotion or experience that we're bringing into the present moment, but our body can't tell the difference.
Okay. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, for sure. I like that.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
So deep. So deep we go.
It's a lot. But Yeah, so I mean, it's just, again, just trying to destigmatize another mental health disorder and just discussing it in terms of our own experiences and everything. But so with that being said, I think we're going to close out for today. And then our affirmation for today, to think of one, is I got one. I am filling my mind with positive thoughts, and I'm no longer allowing negative thoughts to conquer.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
All right. So thank you so much again, Adonis. I can't thank you enough. It has been a great couple of episodes with you. And we hope everyone has a great week. And take care, everyone.
All right. See you guys.